Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 167. This week, everything you need to know about purchasing a site with a DA. Fabulous chat with Bob and myself around the things that are a must know. So let's jump on into episode 167. Hello, welcome to episode 167. Back to back, we did DAs last week and we're on them again this week. Last week we talked about what you need to know about your DA. This week we're going to talk about purchasing sites with DAs, and again the things you need to look out for when it's already been done and the DA's been lodged. But before we do, giving away Property Millionaires Exposed, and this week it's going to Daniel Eason. Daniel spoke with you a couple of weeks ago. Well, this will be in the post to you today, and I'll look forward to meeting you at our workshop. Now, Bob, tip for the week.
Oh,
here he goes, he's in shock. I haven't done that for a while.
I hate being put on the spot. I'll tell you one though.
Yeah.
It's probably worth, when you park your car at a shopping centre, this is a weird one.
Oh, hang on, he's having a go at me.
It's probably worth parking in the far corner where there's no other cars and just taking that little extra 50 metres of walk each way.
Oh, I'd agree.
Hey, because we just had to do a couple of repairs on yours. 3 times when you've been parked, you've had damage done to your car.
Yep.
Finally got around to fixing all 3.
Terrible. One of them was one of those, I don't know if you know, a while ago, cause there were some crazy retired people keying people's cars in the Sunshine Coast, and mine got keyed. Crazy.
The weird thing was they only chose expensive cars to key.
Yeah. It was on the news, we saw it, and then we noticed that mine had been done. We're like, hang on, either that or I've got an enemy out there somewhere, but most people wouldn't know my car.
Yeah,
so I think
that was really weird.
It was.
Because they were quite selective about the cars they keyed.
Yeah, and it was on the news, and then we're like, oh my gosh, that was me. Anyway, yeah, good point. I thought you were going to say something cheeky about losing cars in car parks, which is my specialty.
I'll save that one for next time.
Okay, that's next week's tip.
Up to an hour and a half to find your cars. A bit of a record, I think.
Yeah, I know. I excel at that. That's what I'm good at. Anyway, Bob, today we're talking about purchasing sites with DAs. Last week we finished off with what you need to do when you buy a site that doesn't stack up and you can't get your finance, whether you choose to sell or choose to hold and wait for the market to come back up. This week I want to talk, or let's unpack, well, you wanted to talk. This
sort of leads on to this subject, doesn't it?
From
the last one we did, from the last podcast we did.
Yeah, so talking about purchasing a site that has a DA, and I know that you've done that tons of times, haven't you?
Yeah, I had. I used to do a lot of property development syndicates where we'd buy sites, set up a structure and develop it. And what we did back in those days, we used to like to buy sites with development approvals in place because 2 reasons. One, we knew exactly what we were buying because it had an approval. The other thing, it shortens up the time frame. So you don't have those holding costs. Now, you pay a bit more generally. If it's a deal that stacks up and it has a development permit, you pay a bit more, but you're saving on interest and you're saving on time and you can get in and out of the deal quicker. So, and you know exactly what you're buying.
Yeah.
You can't always do that though.
And I think there's a key there. You know what you're buying, you're saving interest. Bob's just given away some great tips there. So if you are interested in learning about property development, we do have a 3-day workshop coming up on October 11, 12 and 13. Phenomenal event, and you will want to be there. So I just have to drop that in now. It is definitely worth coming, and if you want to have a chat to me about it, you're welcome to go to our website and book a call with me, or have a look at what it involves and just come along. We've got some great deals coming on at the moment for purchasing tickets to that, or if you're a past student, you get a really fabulous discount. Anyway, fabulous event. So just so you know what you're doing, it's worth checking us out. We've had, what's the record, Bob, of the person who's come the most? Was it?
It's at least 5 or 7 or something. Is it more than that?
It was 9.
Oh, 9.
It was 9.
Oh, there you go.
I think he's now being a property development coach these days too, I think.
Well, after 9 you could.
He might be able to. We're not going to give him any free publicity.
You could pretend to.
You could pretend, yeah, exactly. So moving on, Bob, purchasing a site with a DA, you've done it plenty of times, but I know you haven't done it in recent times. And what's the reason for that? Because we're still doing syndicates, we're still developing, and we have investors on board with us. So, we have investors come in and do joint ventures with us, but we aren't doing any that came with the previous DA. What's the reason for that?
Well, I think there's probably less deals on the market with DAs in recent times.
Why would that be?
No idea. And either people have got a DA and it doesn't stack, so they're not selling it, or you always get the person, as we found out in the last podcast we did, who buys a site that doesn't stack, got a DA, can't get the finance, and then sells it. But I think there's less around with DAs. But the other thing is, my preference is still to get a DA because I get exactly what I want, and I'm not buying somebody else's compromise. I'll only compromise so much if I was buying a site with the DA, but if I do it myself, I'll get exactly what I want.
Could you explain compromise to me?
Well,
in this instance, what you mean?
If the DA I get is 100%, and I'm looking at a site that's got a DA that might be 90% of what I would do, but the other 10% isn't going to have a big effect, and that's all rated, to the feasibility, the price and everything else, I might still do it. But the issue is a lot of sites with DAs don't work for different reasons. And so you've got to be just as selective with a site that has a DA, if not more so, than one that doesn't. Because
you could be buying somebody else's problem that they couldn't get finance for.
Yeah, they couldn't get finance for, or the design's all wrong, or a whole heap of things.
So, Bob, I know you've got a great story that you've told at workshops before, and it is a great story.
One?
Oh, yeah, I said workshops, as I've been to plenty, about the DA that somebody had where instead of putting 4 on, and they ended up putting 5 on, and you can talk about the design of that, but really not using that rule of thumb, which is the highest and best use of a site, so what makes the most profit, and it's not always ramming more properties on there. So talk us through that particular one that I'm referring to there.
So more isn't always better.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. So look, when it comes, this particular example that you're referring to, it was put up to us with a development permit in place, a DA, and so the first thing I do, if I see a site with a DA, the first thing I'll look at is the plans. What are the plans that got approved? Because that tells me a lot. And in many cases, I might just throw it in the bin at that point. I don't even need to read the approval. I start at the plans. And in this particular case, it had 5 townhouses on a lot in like a big horseshoe sort of shape, around both sides, around the back up the other side. And I knew the size of the lot, and I thought, geez, normally we'd put 4 on that size lot. How come they got 5? Now, there's no town planning reason why you couldn't put 5 on it instead of 4. And they did, and they got it approved. But I thought, how big are they? Because my first concern was, if I normally put 4 on that size site, now there's 5, they have to be smaller. Because you've got to have a certain amount for, for courtyards, driveways and landscaping. So let's have a look. And I started to look, and I looked at the overall size, and they were less than what the market would normally expect.
How long did it take, Bob, when you started looking? Is your physical reaction like, all right, what do you do there? I was like, God, here's a go.
Well, I sort of went looking for that problem. They must be smaller if there's 5 on instead of 4.
Yeah.
And then on page 1, usually of the architect's plans, they have the sizes of the townhouse. And I looked at them, they're a bit small. And then I started looking at the floor plans to see what the design was. And when I looked at the ground level, so it's a standard format, kitchen, living, dining, powder, downstairs, normal stuff, garage. When I looked at it, I thought there was an area designated dining, but it was actually at the bottom of the stairs that go upstairs. There was technically no dining at all. And it was quite compact. So there was a kitchen of sorts, a U-shaped kitchen, and then a lounge, not a very big one. And they had sort of the word dining over to one side, but it wasn't really dining.
Because it was more of a thoroughfare.
Yeah, it was more of a thoroughfare. It was where you come in the front door and then go up the stairs. And I thought, well, okay, there's no dining. Okay, so really you've got to put furnishing it, you've got to put the dining in the lounge room.
And there wasn't a breakfast bar that you could double up as a dining. No, there was nothing there.
People don't want to live off a breakfast bar. It's okay for a quick breakfast.
Yeah.
Don't want to make that your dining table and you've got guests over, what do you do?
No.
So there was no dining room. And even everything was just tight. And then I looked upstairs, same problem. Bedrooms undersized. 2.7 by 2.7 bedrooms, 2 and 3, which is, I never do a bedroom in a townhouse, even the very smallest bedroom, number 3 or number 4, never less than 3 by 3 plus the building.
Yep.
And so, and even the main bedroom was like 3 by 3.4 or something, which is too small for a main. And the bedrooms were too small. The living area didn't have a dining room, just too tight.
Is there a place that particular development would have worked, Bob? Is there that small type thing that would have worked somewhere? This didn't particularly just work at this place? Where would that work?
Oh, Rwanda or maybe Afghanistan. Not
Stop
Australia.
it. Really?
Oh, I'm not even sure. I'm not sure if the Rwandans would even want to live there.
How did they get away? I mean, who in their right mind drew that thinking that would be okay?
Well, a mum and dad idiot.
All right, would do. Yep.
Someone who don't, look, being kind. Bit brutal, sorry. But look.
But wouldn't the person who drew the plans up have thought, oh, that's a bit stupid?
No.
They didn't know what they were doing?
So it's two people did that. One is the landowner.
Yeah.
So I can tell you what happened. The landowner's not a developer because no developer in their right mind would design something like that. It's just your normal mum and dad, or I say mum and dad, somebody who owns the lot, not a developer. And so what's happened? Somebody's told them, oh, look, if you get a... I should also point out the house had gone. So I'd say there's a situation
so they've already
where
knocked the house.
The old house was probably full of white ants and it's gone. So it's a vacant block of land, right? So no rental coming in.
Yep.
And even if you buy it yourself, there's no rental coming in.
Yep.
While you get your approval. So even from a feasibility point of view,
you want a delayed settlement.
Yeah, delayed settlement or just get
they
it cheap.
They can take the bath.
Cheap enough to cope with the no income coming in while you get your approvals.
Nasty.
That's a couple of side issues with this site.
Yeah.
But just imagine, this is like a person who doesn't know anything about development. Somebody's told them you can make a lot more money if you get a development permit. Not necessarily the case, and we can talk more about that later. And so they've rocked up to an architect or a building designer and said, hey, listen, I want to get a development permit on this block of land because I want to sell it. And the architect says, yeah, okay.
Do you think they went into that wanting to sell it, or they didn't intend to develop it? Do you know?
Oh, look, it could be either.
Yeah.
It could be either.
Yeah.
There's a couple of reasons why they might have ended up with this rubbish design. But often it happens like this because often the people that sell a site with a development permit, it's either a lemon, like we talked about in the previous podcast, or they just think they're going to make a fortune if they squeeze more. And so they've rocked up to an architect and the architect says, okay, I can put 4, maybe even 5 townhouses on that site. They immediately think, oh, 5,
more money.
I'll make more money.
Yeah.
5, give me 5. Now, the architect doesn't care. The architect just gets...
Do you really think so?
No, he doesn't care. Oh. They just get paid for doing a job.
Nothing against architects. I know we have a few listening. Not you, though.
It's not their responsibility.
Oh.
No, why should they? They just get paid for doing a job. Ma and Pa, he said the right thing. He said, look, I can put 4 on, but I could probably squeeze 5 on. Squeeze 5 on, I'll get more money. Okay, I'll squeeze 5 on. And
For those who are watching this on YouTube, that was great acting, Bob.
Well, how do you squeeze 5 on where there should be 4? You've got to shrink them. How do you shrink them? Well, there's always sorts of ways of shrinking a townhouse design. Use an L-shaped kitchen instead of a U-shape and stick the dining table in the kitchen in the L. That's one way of doing it. Upstairs, don't have a separate WC, stick it in the bathroom. Shrink your bedrooms. I mean, join them all up so you haven't got gaps between townhouses and just use common wall. I mean, there's all sorts of ways of shrinking a townhouse. But of course, you're hurting the resale value every time you do it. Because this was a decent suburb. This is, not out in the Mulga somewhere. This was a decent suburb where you can't get away with that sort of stuff. So
what happened,
Sure
Bob?
enough, they went through, got the DA.
Yep.
Because the council doesn't care whether you've got 5 or 4. You're allowed a certain square metres of building area. And they complied.
The outside was what they needed to comply with, just the inside was a shambles.
Inside, yeah. 4 instead of 5. And so, when I looked at it, I looked at it and thought, well, there's no way I can build that and sell it. Or, yes, I could sell it, but at what price? Way down. Even if you wanted to keep them and rent them, well, they're not even a good renter. And
in that particular suburb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it'd be hard to rent that stuff. Crampy little bedrooms, no dining room. I mean, you'd rent it for sure, but at what price?
Yeah.
You'd sell it, but at what price? There's always a buyer.
Yeah.
How far down do you have to go? And that was, that's the issue there. And also it was a vacant block of land. So once again, no income, for that period when you're getting your development permit and your building permit and getting ready to start construction. So that would have to be written into the FISO as well. So Yeah, not a good deal. And that's not the only one. I've seen plenty like that where people put on
So what
too
happened?
much.
What
See,
happened?
Maximising the site is different from maximising your profit.
Yes, and there we go, highest and best use.
I could wheel out a dozen examples from a duplex to a high-rise building doing that. Somebody joined our mentoring program once. I know in the previous podcast you alluded to people that might have joined our mentoring program
And they've already
bought
purchased.
a site.
Yeah.
One particular person I know bought a site and got all the development approval plans done on a 4-storey apartment block. And when I looked at it, it's never going to work.
So they did all that, then joined up.
Yeah.
So it's just the wrong order.
It took me probably 2 months to convince them just to dump the whole thing, walk away from the money they burnt.
What would have been
and-
the bath if they'd
and
gone
let-
through?
Would only get worse and probably not get money at the end anyway. So that's an example on a larger scale
Yeah.
of somebody that did that. And it took me a while to convince them to cop the pain and start again.
So back to this one, Bob. How long did it sit around for?
It sat around for a long time. I didn't want it, and I didn't notice it pop up for many, many months later. Nobody wanted it. I don't know what eventually was the case. You know,
Because I know it's in Brisbane. I'll be keen to drive past next time we're around.
could be a bit of a dig up to try and work out where it is. It was in the suburb. It's not big. It's in the suburb of Annerley, which is quite a good suburb in Brisbane, not far out of the city, with pretty good pricing. So that's not the rubbish that you would design. There.
No.
So I guess the bottom line is, out of that one, you've got a person who's inexperienced, gets a DA, not a developer, so they don't even know what they're doing, and there's too much on the site, and it's not going to work. That's what you get out of that.
Yeah, and then so we were talking about the DA. So they were either going to construct it, realised that they couldn't, and then had to sell or hold wood duck, whatever they chose to do. We don't know the final outcome. But what if their plan actually was just for a DA uplift, meaning they bought the site, wanted to get a DA, and then sell it on and make that uplift? What is generally a DA uplift worth, Bob? I don't know the answer to that one.
Well, there's no answer to it. That's why, because it depends entirely on
Profit
the
margin.
the type of project, the type of product, what city it's in different states can have a variation. What I mean by that is this: if you say you buy a site to do 3 townhouses, the site, it's the right size because most of that suburb's that size. It's the right zoning because for blocks and blocks and blocks around it's townhouse zoning. And it's not all that hard to get an approval in that council. They can't really stop you anyway because if you comply, the zoning, the size, everything's good anyway. You won't get a big uplift on that because it's just a matter of like doing the job and getting it. Pretty simple, straightforward. You won't get a big uplift. But if it's in an area where council's pretty tough on DAs, it's hard to get a DA. Then if you got one, it's worth more. The type of project, like I'll give an example of a big project I did once where I got the zoning changed and then got an approval for a retirement village, and it went up 5 times.
Right, because you make it more valuable. Okay, got you.
On a big project, rezoning, development permit. So there's so many variables. But quite often, small townhouse project, it's already zoned, it's the right size. It's no big deal to get a DA necessarily. It won't go up a lot. You make your money by doing the development, not necessarily on the flick.
So back to purchasing a site with a DA, what does somebody really need to do to make sure that they're not purchasing a lemon from another wood duck?
Well, due diligence, it's always the thing.
Yeah.
So, as I said, the first time I look at a site with a development permit in place, a DA in place, I look at the design.
Yeah.
And like I did with that one, all of a sudden I realised, well, there's normally 4 on that site and there's 5. That means they've got to be small. Then I look at the plan, oh, yeah, they are small, pretty bad. It was pretty quick.
Yeah.
All of that happened in under a minute, I'm sure. I wasn't really so much concerned about what are the conditions of the approval. If the plans look good, and I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. That's sort of roughly what I'd do. Then I'd look at the conditions of the approval.
But what would they likely be?
Well, generally these days, pretty straightforward, but I just want to see there's nothing sort of tricky or a bit onerous in there.
Give me some examples on that.
Well, not so much these days, but in the old days,
Horse and cart days, Bob.
In the horse and cart days, they used to give you a development permit easier, and yet a lot of stuff you'd have to sort out during the building permit,
Right.
like your service connections and everything.
Yeah.
They'd say, we approve it subject to you getting a connection for your sewer and your water, whereas these days they make you sort that connection out earlier.
Yeah.
But there could be something to do with perhaps an upgrade that they want, a road widening. There could, there could be something to do with some upgrade of services, that sort of thing. So there could be some conditions in there that might cost you a bit of extra money that you need to be aware of. There's generally not a condition that would be a deal killer, but you still need to understand it. I never went that far on that other one because the plans killed it. And I always go to the plans. Another thing I do when I look at the plans of something that already has a development permit is have a look at what we call the side elevations. So it's the design of the buildings in this development approval, looking at it from the side, because that's going to tell me the slope of the land. And sometimes they're quite slopey. And you can tell by that, by looking at the side elevation of the plans. Now, that's going to cost me extra in construction costs, and sometimes quite a bit. Or the plans could have like big cantilevers, and that means a lot of steel. So they're looking at that design. I look at the roof, how complex the roof is, looking for cantilevers. I'm looking at anything that can make building that expensive. Construction expensive.
Yeah.
And things like slope. Because some people just do their feasibility on a square metre rate. They say, okay, it's a 200 square metre townhouse and it's 2,500 a square metre, therefore it's 500,000 to build.
These are just general figures not to be used.
No, don't quote them.
We just threw it out there.
I've chosen some round numbers, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, did that square metre rate include GST or not? Ooh, I don't know. Well, there's 10% variance.
Yeah.
But those square metre rates that you often
Stormwater running up, running down, how do you get rid of it?
Yeah.
All those things. Yeah.
Yeah. But a square metre rate from a builder is generally based on a level block of land, good soil, good foundations, and just normal building, not with big cantilevers, not with big fancy roofs. And so it's a little bit dangerous just to work purely off a square metre rate without actually, looking at the design of this thing, because I could see all these things that are going to cost me extra. Instead of being maybe a $400,000 townhouse, I'm looking at it and thinking, well, it's probably about 480 with all this other stuff in there. So that can make a difference. That's why I look at the plans. First thing I do is look at the plans, side elevations,
and even
floor
little
plans.
things like you're close to a train station or it runs through your backyard, and how do you get rid of that noise, and will that cost you extra? There's the little things that can just kill profit.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be necessarily
in the
showing in a
build
DA.
cost.
Yeah.
Well,
and a build cost.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, I've seen sites with a development permit that back onto a railway line.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking
That
of.
would have
Maybe.
been dealt with during the DA because they would have had to get an acoustic report. Well, that acoustic report might mean quite expensive acoustic fencing. It could mean thicker glass in the windows. It could mean a lot more insulation. It could mean double-line plasterboard. There could be a bit in the build that's now reflected, in the build cost. So those sorts of things.
And they don't show up in a DA. They show up in a build. Well,
the DA would have probably
pointed
showed
it out,
somewhere,
but not costing.
It would have shown somewhere that there's an acoustic report required.
Yeah.
Then you've got to look at the acoustic report and decide, is there much to do or not? And if there's a whole heap of acoustic treatments that need doing, it's going to cost you more. And so there's these things. There's little things to look after. But look, the bottom thing about a site with a development permit is some work, a lot don't. The ones that don't work because they want too much for the land. Why do they want too much for the land? Well, they're either a bit greedy. They think it's worth more because it's got a development permit, and that's not the case. They've got a really complex build. The actual price per square metre of the land might be okay for that area, but the build's really expensive. So if the build's expensive, you can't sell it for any more. You have to buy the land for less to compensate to get your profit margin. So there's all these things that come into it.
And negotiating that with the seller can be tough because it's like when you've made a decision, it's really hard to backtrack. When you've decided that something you own is worth X, and it's really difficult for you to realise that it's not. Once they've decided, it's hard.
And your normal mum and dad can't understand it.
No.
Because if a developer tries to explain it to them, you've got a sloping block. It's going to cost us a fair bit more to build. We can't sell them for any more at the end. We have to make a profit. Therefore, it has to be compensated in the land purchase. That's reality.
Because remember, it's because you've got to go to a financier who goes to a valuer who, it all just falls back as dominoes.
It's got to make that profit margin.
Yeah, and then the mum and dad at the top of the domino, they've got to hit that realisation, and it's hard to sell it, don't they, Bob?
They think the developer's trying to rip them off. You know what they based it on? Jack over the road.
Yes.
who has a 800 metre lot the same size of those.
Perfectly flat.
Perfectly dead
Nowhere
flat,
near that
slopes
railway line.
2 degrees to the road,
Yeah.
no problem with sewer, water or everything else.
Yeah, he got that.
He got that.
Yes.
And what have I got on there? What's our mum and dad got on the other side? Right? A sloping block that's going to cost another 100 grand to build, so that 100 grand has to come off the land.
Too many houses on for the DA.
We can't.
No
How
kitchens.
did we get the sewer and water back up to the top? Well, we can't.
It's a mess.
So we've got to go through the neighbours at the back to the next street. Well,
Yeah.
there's another 80 grand. You know, they don't understand that.
Yeah.
So you just got to, like, if you can't convince them, of course, half the time you've got real estate agents who don't understand that and they're sort of backing them. So
Nothing against the real estate agents listening. Some of you do understand. We realise
there are
that.
a few good ones out there, and I hope those.
And
that
it's
are
you,
listening.
whoever's listening. It's
If
you.
if a real estate agent listens regularly to our podcast, they'd be a smart real estate agent. And
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about.
No.
So, yeah, all those things can happen. But do you know, I know you know, a development permit, it doesn't mean it's going to stack up.
No.
Some people think, oh, great, it's got a development permit.
Perfect.
Well, it might. If it's a good development permit and you get it at the right price, which means it stacks up in your feasibility, it's great because you'll have a quicker project. You don't have to wait. And you know what you're buying. That's all good. But development permits aren't guaranteed that the deal's going to stack up or work. And they're not worth telephone numbers because they got a DA. Sometimes they're not worth a lot more at all because they got a DA.
So there are varying reasons that people will sell with a DA, and it's not always negative. Sometimes they will stack up, but we're just saying be aware, just because they have a DA doesn't mean they do stack up.
Yeah, you talked a minute ago about somebody selling a site with a DA because they might have found another one they want to do more.
Yeah.
And that reminded me of a story once where I bought a site that had a development approval off another development company. And that can happen, although it's a little bit rare. And it was a larger site for 17 townhouses, but this particular developer went through and got a development permit. In fact, he was halfway through getting a building permit. When he got onto another site that was closer to the city for some apartments, and that's really what he wanted to do. He decided he wanted to do that one, but couldn't do them both. So he let an agent know that he wanted to sell the site, the townhouse site with the DA, and said, can you just go to your database? He said, I don't want it publicly thrown out there, it's for sale. And so this particular agent, who I'd only recently met, put it up to me and said, look, I've got a developer. They've got a development permit for 17 townhouses. They're halfway through getting their building permit. They just want to do it, like clean it up off the market. Are you interested? And I had a look at it. And they said, I had a look at the price and I thought it was a bit dear. So I did a quick story. I said to the agent, look, can you set up a meeting with the developer? Because I thought, well, look, this can be easily solved, developer to developer.
Yeah.
It's not developer to a mum and dad, which is a tough gig. And so I did up my feasibility.
Someone who knows what they're talking about, to somebody who knows what they're talking about. Yeah.
Went and had a talk to the developer. I took my my laptop with me with the feasibility on it. I said, look, I know you're chasing this price. I said, I just can't make it stack up.
Because he's not going to be able to get finance. Remember that whole from last podcast,
and the developer
valuation
knows that.
finance.
Sort of a grin on his face. I said, have a look at this. And before I showed him, I said, what's the bill price you're working on? And he told me, and I just basically used his numbers.
Yep.
And I said, have a look at that. It doesn't make enough money.
You put it in your visa.
He knew that, but I did it in front of him at a table.
Yeah.
And he's a decent guy. And I said, look, it doesn't work. I said, but you'd probably know that. And I said, look, I don't blame you for trying to get that, but you and I know it's not worth it.
Yeah.
And I said, look, have a look at this. And I rejigged some numbers, and it came up. I said, look.
That works there.
That works. And the reason it works is because you can't pay that for the land, you can pay that.
Yeah.
And in the end, he said, yeah, okay, I'll take that.
Yeah,
So
job done.
No harm having a shot.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is a 17 townhouse project is probably going to go to an experienced developer, not somebody on the first one. So he's probably not going to pull the wool. But, hey, have a go, have a shot at it. And I got it at a price that gave me the margin.
Yep.
What I didn't tell him is that I'd already gotten a build price off my builder way below the builder he was going to use.
Bob, trickster.
No, because I asked him what his build price was that he was working on,
Yep.
and I used his. Mine was lower.
When he said it,
I
did
could
you
have,
kind of go,
actually
boom?
bought it at the price he was asking and still made it okay with my builder, but not
Shrewd.
with his builder.
Yeah.
So I actually got the extra margin. But that's an example of buying something with a development permit of somebody.
Who knows what they're
First of all, it
doing.
was a good development permit. The designs were really good. Everything's good. Got it at a reasonable price. Was able to talk to the developer directly, and the agent was okay with that because it's one developer talking to another.
And you would have assured him that, the commission goes to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually ended up having 2 or 3 meetings with this developer before I finally crunched it. The first time the agent came, and the next two and three didn't.
Yeah.
He knew he was going to get the commission, no drama. And I said to him, I said, look, you don't have to do anything here. I said, I'll earn you the commission. I said, you can't sell it to me. I'll either buy it or I won't.
Yeah.
It won't be because you can sell. I said, it'll just be down to the numbers and it'll be the conversation with me and the other developer.
Yep.
So I said, I'm happy to earn you your commission by making the deal work. And I said, you don't have to do anything for that. Just make the intro.
Perfect.
And it worked. So there you go. Some DAs are good.
I think great example, Bob, of a developer talking to the other person, but you've got to know what you're doing. And I think this is what it all comes down to. You have to know what you're doing. You just can't wing property development. There's just too much at risk.
No,
And that's where
no.
risk comes in, and we don't like to use that word because it's scary.
Yeah.
But you have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, and something else that we haven't even touched on about development permits. You know, I said sometimes, you know, they're overpriced for a range of reasons. Some people make their property worth even less money by getting a development permit.
Yes, do know that.
Some people get shocked at that. They can sort of understand that you might not add a lot of value on in some cases by getting a development permit, but you can actually make it worth a lot less. Because you talked earlier about the highest and best use, you know, the highest and best use of a site, because a site or a block of land can have more than one use. It can have 2 or 3 or even 4 uses. Which one makes the most profit? Well,
Who knows?
you've got to do your numbers. You could have a site, and I'm thinking of plenty.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of all the Deal or No Deals you used to do. We should put them on
yeah.
YouTube. They're so cool. It's just that the numbers are outdated, but they go through all those things you look for, and then you go, was it a deal? No, no deal. Couldn't work because of this. Or, yeah, perfect. Was a deal. It worked. They were
Yeah.
so good. We should post them.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking of some sites where, let's say it's an 800 metre site. You could do a nice house on it. That's one use. You might be able to cut it into 2 400 lots, which is a 2-lot subdivision, and maybe build a house on each one. That's a totally different use, same block of land. It might be zoned that you could do townhouses, which means you could build a house on it, you could subdivide it into 2 lots, or you could build some townhouses. That's the third use. But if you can do 2-storey townhouses, then you can do 2-storey apartments. So you might have a situation where you can do 6 apartments, 4 townhouses, 2 lots with 2 houses, or just 1 house on a nice big 800 metre lot. 4 uses, same block of land. Which one makes you the most profit? Well, you've got to do your numbers. It might not always be the most intense use of the site.
No, there's no thumb rule with that. It's just all about how the numbers come up.
Yep. And that's having different uses. And that's what can happen with development permits. Whereas I've seen people, I'm thinking of one example, it was a site that had a house on it. They got a development permit for 6 townhouses.
Oh, God.
But everything was wrong. The design was wrong, very complex, very expensive build. It was sloping, they had cantilevers, they had expensive roofs, they had a raised slab, with columns under it that the townhouses got built on because it was a sloping block. I mean, it was really expensive construction. When you do a feasibility on that, using that incredibly high construction price, which is what it was, you had to buy the site for under $100,000
Oh, my God, that's so
to
ridiculous.
even get your margin. At the time, they wanted $800,000 for the site. You know what? It was probably worth about $700 just as a house.
But to do that, the
They
land was
wanted
worth
$800. I don't know why. I don't know where they started off because it was on the market for a while. They probably started off at $950 and it was down to $800 when I looked at it. But I worked out it was worth less than $100,000 as a development site. It was worth $700 as a house, $100,000 as a 6 townhouse site. So there's
Leave it as a house. Yeah.
There's an example of how you could get a DA, but the highest and best use was still the house that they started off with. And I can tell you that, look, that's 10 years ago. I passed that property from time to time. The house is still sitting there.
Yeah, that ain't changing anytime soon.
It's only ever worth what a house
And
is
I
worth.
think that it also points out, Bob, and you go back through, we're at 167. I know we've covered it somewhere, just around not over-designing your site, like the over-design factor that goes into that sort of thing, which makes construction so expensive, which means it just doesn't work. If they had perhaps gone from the 6 very expensive to, say, 2 or 3 more moderate that suited that area, that patch, could that have worked then?
It would have been hard as well because the reason they built it was a block that sloped down from the road. It was too steep basically to build on. So what they did, they created a big concrete slab level, a lot of money in that to build the townhouses on top of.
Yeah.
With concrete columns underneath. They had to do that because they couldn't get the storm water off the block.
Didn't it go under?
So they had to they had to run the stormwater from the townhouses back to the front of the block, but to do that they had to build this big slab in the sky and put the townhouses on top of it. And there was a lot of other complications, big candle, like everything that you could think of to make a build expensive was in that deal.
Well, I think, Bob, we've done a lot on DAs, buying sites with DAs, and some examples of when they don't work, knowing that they can work. I think in the end we can summarise with, as usual, you need to know what you're doing. And so I'll just go with the workshop again. Remember, 11th, 12th and 13th of October in the Gold Coast 2024. We would love for you to join us. But we hope you've got a lot out of the last 2 episodes with DAs. Thanks so much. Really interesting. Great chat. And early morning podcasting. I think it's the go.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it from now on.
Yep.
All right, folks, I hope you got a lot out of that, and we look forward to catching up with you soon. Bye for now.
Bye now.